So you may have heard, if you've lived in a church world, or maybe you haven't, that there's another high-level pastor who suffered a moral failure this last week. And it's heartbreaking. It's a discussion that we don't like to have. But it's caused us to have some questions. And one of the things that comes to light is just a matter of faith. What happens when there maybe just isn't a true depth of faith? You know, it's easy to see that play out in pastoral ministry, but for us as well, maybe you don't work at a church. That's great. Maybe you do. That's also great. But what does it look like when you start to realize some symptoms of maybe I don't have the depth of faith that I want or need? How does that play out? What does it look like? And most importantly, what can I do to fix it? Welcome to Midweek at the Compass. My name is Jake. It's great to be here with you again. I am joined by my friend Gerald Jake. Gerald, thanks for taking the time to do this again.
Hey, you're welcome.
We are here at the lovely Bolingbrook campus. Welcome. You get to see kind of all of its lobby glory. It is a great atrium space. We don't say lobby here at the Compass Church. Behind the scenes. It's okay.
It's okay.
But this might be one of the last times we're here together at the Bolingbrook campus, Gerald.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about why that is.
Yeah, well, Compass Church, I just want to thank Jake for having me on again. And Bolingbrook campus, awesome campus. I've been here 3.5 years. But come January, the Lord has allowed us to transition into the Naperville campus to take on a new role, pastor of adult ministries at the Naperville campus. So it's kind of a bittersweet. We're still in the same church, but we're leaving this campus, and I'll be seeing all of you at Naperville campus come January.
Awesome. That's really exciting. So can I ask a little bit just how this came about? The hope behind it. What are we looking for here with you in a new location? Slightly new position too. Just tell me a little bit about what that's going to ultimately look like walking into it.
Yeah. In my previous experience, and for those of you who know me, I planted a church. I worked in church settings for a very long time. And for me, developing people in Jesus is kind of my sweet spot. I kind of look at how people grow, develop in discipleship, how they follow Jesus on this phenomenal journey that all people should be on. And so I've done that in Bolingbrook. We set up some systems, and I believe that we can do that at Naperville to get at the heart of what in the world is discipleship. How do we get people to understand who they are in Jesus and what God desires of them? And I hope by the end of this you'll know that God desires more who you're going to be than what you're going to do for him.
Ooh, that's really good. Mm-hmm. Who you're going to be as opposed to what you're going to do. I'm a doer, Gerald. I think we talked about this last time we were together.
Same here. I'm a doer too.
We were talking the story of the prodigal son, and I was the son who stayed home and decided to do things because I thought that would get me the good things in life. Mm-hmm. God's not worried about what you do. He's worried about who you are and who you are becoming. Really good word. Yeah. But to me, that almost sounds like how you're growing in your faith, right? If it's who you're becoming, it's how we're taking those next steps, this discipleship pathway you talked about.
Correct. And as I kind of use the illustration of a iceberg. As you know, an iceberg kind of is this gigantic mass of ice that kind of sits atop water in cold areas, of course. And what we see in the iceberg is just the top 10%, 15%. But below the surface, the parts that we don't see, there is a large component of what makes that iceberg. And the reality is that Christians, too, what we see in most people is the top 10, 15%. But really, what we need to work on is the things that people don't see, that bottom 90, 85% that people don't see. And that's the stuff that God cares about.
Interesting. So the stuff behind the scenes, below the surface, the foundation, if you will.
Yeah.
That's really good. So let's dive in and talk about it. So as we were going back and forward about this concept of how do you build faith and what does that look like, I thought maybe it'd be a good idea to talk about what some symptoms might be of a lack of faith, right? So you were willing enough to kind of go through and come up with a list of 10 symptoms that might show a lack in the depth of faith. Now, what we want to know, if you're willing and you're able to chime in real time and let us know if any of these are resonating with you. I know that takes a lot of bravery to go ahead and chime in with an area maybe you're struggling with. And if you're not willing to do that, it's okay. We'd love to have you shoot us a direct message through Facebook. You can send me an email. You can find my email at jmcnamara@thecompass.net. It's on the compass.net website. Or you can join our Compass Online Facebook page. You can go ahead, or our group there, send me a message that way. Whatever the case is, we want to have conversation about how we can help you on your faith journey. What can we do that's going to encourage you in growing this foundation of your faith? So with that, number 1 of 10. We're going to do this quick hitter style. Don't worry, you're not going to be here for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But here we go. Number 1 of a symptom of a lack of faith, you put using God to run from God.
Woo!
What are you getting at there?
Yeah, so that's a tough one, because as a pastor, as a person who desires the people to listen and be engaged with what I'm saying, sometimes instead of doing what I'm doing for God, I use those things to do it for myself. For example, when I do God's work, it's really to satisfy myself and not really God. Another example, when I do things in His name, God never really asked me to do. When my prayers are really about God doing my will and not His will. When I demonstrate Christian behavior in front of the right Christian people to give off a presence that I'm really a great person, when behind closed doors, I'm not. That's an example. Those are just a few examples of what it's like to really use God to run from God. Use godly activities, but really I'm running from God.
Yeah, you're just using it as a smokescreen.
It's a smoke screen. It's a smoke screen.
All right, so number 2, ignoring the emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. How could that be a symptom of a lack of faith?
You know, God created us both physical, emotional, and spiritual being. They're all tied together. There's some great systematic theology books on that. But growing up a certain way in a certain denominational style, sometimes emotions like anger, sadness, and fear were of the devil, when in reality, these are normal human behaviors and reactions to things. To deny these emotions and to over-spiritualize them is to deny the person that God created you to be. And so if you feel things like anger and sadness and even fear, it's okay. That's normal. What's not normal, and what really says a lot about your spirituality, is when you start to deny these things, or even tell people who experience these things that it's not okay to experience these things. It's okay to experience anger, sadness, and fear.
Followers of Jesus were never meant to be emotionless beings.
No.
We're told that we're known for being Christians by how we love. Love is a great emotion. It's one that should be at the forefront of what we do.
Yeah.
Emotional beings should display emotions at times.
Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly.
All right, number 3, dying to the wrong things.
Woo!
What are you getting at there?
Woo! So, as Christians, sometimes we believe it's okay to overwork ourselves, overcommit ourselves, meet with toxic people, because it's okay that we need to do these things for the sake of the kingdom. If you're killing your emotional self-being, if you're denying family time with your family, you're doing and dying to all the wrong things. A sign of true spirituality is someone who's able to say no. Someone who can actually say, this is not healthy for me. A sign of Christian maturity is also saying, that's not good for me and my family's health. I'm not going to do that.
All right, so let's just keep rolling down the list here. Number 5 is a symptom that could be a symptom of a lack of a depth of faith. You have dividing our lives into secular and sacred compartments. What are you getting at?
Yeah, this is a difficult one, because especially in church settings where a lot of the church members act proper on a Sunday, but from Monday to Saturday, they're a totally different person. Case in point, I have a lot of friends who are servers in different restaurants, and their greatest fear, the server's greatest fear, is Sundays after church. Why is that? Because they get the rush of church people who come to eat at the establishment, the restaurant. And these servers tell me this is some of the most horrible experience that they have. And as a pastor, this saddens me. I always think, I hope it's not my people that are going to this restaurant and treating these servers poorly. But that is the case sometimes. And sometimes you begin to see people who act properly on a Sunday, on a weekend worship service, who during the week are doing things that when you find out, you're kind of shocked. And you're kind of surprised that these people are acting this way, because I see them on a weekend service. They say hi. They serve on committees. They serve as a small group leaders. They're a greeter at guest services. But during the week, I get the sense that they're a different person. And so one of the signs of a unhealthy spirituality is this kind of divide between, here are sacred things that I need to keep sacred, and here's everyday normal life where I can act however I want to. And that's an unhealthy way of doing spirituality.
Yeah, I think that's a really easy thing to have happen, right? It's just, I do the Jesus things, and then I do my things, but there's a hard and fast line in between. But no, like, your faith in Jesus should interact with everything that you do, and every way you treat people, and every way you speak and act. That's really good. All right, here we go. Keep rolling down the list. Number 6, doing things for God instead of being with God.
Woof. Woof. For those of you who are doers, I'm sorry. This might hit a little. I don't mean to hit at the core of things, but this is hard because I used to assume that I'm in the church. If I'm in the church every day, that must mean I'm a strong spiritual person. At the heart of things, I'm a lover of God because I'm doing His work. Listen, doing a lot of things for God doesn't mean you're growing exponentially spiritually. Not one bit. Another thing is that a lot of people who do a lot for God and His church usually sometimes say, it's all up to me. If I don't get it done, who's going to get it done? And actually, there seems to be a connection spiritually with someone who does a lot and the idea of the world and the church needs me in order for this thing to survive. There's kind of this savior complex. And so a sign that your spiritual life is unhealthy is if you feel you have to do everything in order for God's kingdom to survive.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and own this now. We're going to press pause here for just a second. This is the one that hits home most for me. You know, if you're an Enneagram person, I'm an Enneagram 1. If you're a Myers-Briggs person, I'm an INTJ. All of that means, like, I think I can do these things best myself. So a lot of times, I like to think that if I don't get things done, the world is going to fall apart. And quite frankly, I know better.
Or you should know better.
I should know better. The world's going to keep on revolving without me doing what I'm doing. God would rather me take the time to be with Him than to go through the checklist of getting things done for Him. So I'm just going to go ahead and own that one right now.
Oh, good.
That's me. That's the one that hit home the most as we were going back and forth on this. So hopefully you're not in the same boat as me, but if you are, there's power in numbers. We can get better together. All right, here we go. Let's keep going. Number 7. Unhealthy faith, a symptom of it, or a lack of depth, could be spiritualizing away conflict. So how does that look?
Yeah. And so conflict and the way you deal with conflict honestly tells me your level of maturity in your spiritual life. A lot of Christians, I think, have the assumption that I need to have it together. I need to look a certain way, and I can't disagree. Because if I disagree, that means there's something wrong, and we can't have the appearance that there's something wrong. So sometimes we brush conflict under the rug. We pretend that these things that caused the conflict never happened, whether I was sinned against, whether I was abused or I abused somebody, and it's spiritualized away. And so what tends to happen is that no healthy resolution and no relational adhesion happens because there is this conflict that we don't talk about because we're scared that if we talk about it, that means our that means things aren't okay. And here's the thing: if there is conflict, you need to talk about it. If you've been hurt by another Christian, you need to resolve these things and talk to it, even if it means asking for help from another Christian to help resolve this conflict. Because ultimately, if this conflict doesn't get resolved, the enemy is going to come in and put a wedge between other Christians, continue to divide us, and then that's how more conflict ends up happening.
You see this every day on social media.
Mm-hmm.
The wedge that just drives people farther and farther apart. Christians against Christians, non-Christians against non-Christians, non-Christians against Christians, all of it. And it doesn't take much to see.
No.
We could talk politics to show a very clear example of there are times that there's just a wedge driven. But there are times when it's conflict-based. You are not meant to go through life pretending everything is okay. There is supposed to be unity, and there can't be unity if there is unresolved conflict and tension.
Amen.
All right, number 8, covering over brokenness and weakness and failure. So how does it look to cover over those things?
You know, what I love about the Bible, it doesn't gloss over weaknesses and failures of some of our greatest heroes. David, a man after God's own heart, is over and over again pointed to in the New Testament as a hero, yet we know what happened with David. Moses, and the line goes on and on and on. The Bible doesn't cover the weaknesses, it exposes it. And so what's interesting is that we tend to kind of gloss over as a means of appearance, but honestly, the greatest mature Christians that I know and that I'm still learning from, they have no problem talking about their weaknesses as a means of helping other people realize their inadequacies and help them grow. Because ultimately at the end, Jesus is Savior. He's perfect. I'm not. God just happens to use people like me, people like people like Jake, to do great and mighty kingdom work. And I take pride in the fact that in spite of my weaknesses, God still uses broken people like me and broken people like you.
It's because of that Paul in the New Testament can say, like, I'll boast even more about my weaknesses because it just makes Jesus look that much better, that he can mend together and fill a broken thing to still do some amazing, amazing kingdom work. All right, number 9, tail end here, living without limits. What does a living without limits have to do with your faith?
Interesting. You know, there was only one superhuman. It's not Superman. Superman doesn't exist.
Spider-Man?
Spider-Man? No, Spider-Man doesn't exist. I'm sorry.
So it's got to be Captain America.
Maybe. But humanity is a limited creation. We weren't meant to jump to the stars, maybe create something to fly to the stars. The ultimate superhuman is Jesus, but even in Jesus, he rested. Even in Jesus, he said no. Even in Jesus, he turned the crowd away. Instead of pulling the gigantic crowd to himself and saying things that would keep him, he said things like, you can't enter the kingdom unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. And they separated. He scattered the crowd. Jesus went away in the mornings because he knew he needed time with the Father to go into the woods, the wilderness, and spend time because he knew his emotional capacity isn't as much as we think it is. And so if Jesus, the superhuman God-man, had limits and said no to certain things, why do we say yes to every single thing?
Ooh.
I wonder that. I always wonder that. And so I take pride in the fact that I say no a lot, and I do that because there was times in my ministry career where I was working a full-time job, security, third shift. I was a full-time seminary student, and I was a part-time youth pastor. I developed sleep apnea. I almost weighed about 275. I was always sleepy, and I realized my sleepy self is not effective in the kingdom of God. And I could tell maybe some of you listening here, you have went way beyond your limits, and you're tired all the time, and you're frustrated. Might I suggest you're not superhuman?
People pleasers? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah. Again, if the first one was number one that hit home, that's a close second. I love making people happy. I don't like when people aren't happy. And when you want to make people happy, you tend to say yes. But there are times and places in space where you need to put the hard line of no in front. All right, last and not least, judging other people's spiritual journey. How can that show a lack of your own personal faith?
Yeah. What I realized over the years is that when you begin to grow in your maturity, in your spiritual level, you begin to have confidence in Jesus, and you start to look more inward. People who look outward towards others really have a lot of shame they're trying to hide. Some of the greatest spiritual bullies, I hate to use that term, that I know are always the ones who are insecure and have a lot of shame, and therefore, to compare themselves and make themselves look better, they're looking outwards and judging other people. I could recall when Jesus was talking about the religious leader who was praying in the temple, "Oh God, thank you, I'm not like that person. I'm not like that person who does this or does that." But yet, that person was also the one who prayed, "I'm a sinner." And Jesus spoke more highly of that humble human person and said, "This is the way you are to pray to the Lord." Very humble. He didn't say what's wrong with the religious leader. He looked to himself. Yet that religious leader is the one who pointed away from himself, to point away from his insecurities, to point away from his own sin and focus on someone else's so he could make himself look better about himself. And I say, if you judge other people's spirituality, it's kind of a sign that's saying something about your lack of spirituality or your lack of spiritual understanding.
So if we ended it here, and just so you know, we'll go ahead in the comment section here, we'll post all 10 of these symptoms so you can go back and double check after the fact and wrestle through it and pray through it and look at the list and be like, which of these areas hits home for me? But if we left it at just here are the symptoms of a lack of faith, this would be the most depressing midweek at the compass we have ever put forward.
Yes.
So Gerald, let me ask you a question in our last just couple of moments here together.
Yeah.
What can we do about it? How can we take these symptoms of maybe a lack of faith to better understand Jesus, to better understand ourselves? What can we do to build the depth of our own faith?
Yeah. So remember, we're not superhuman. At the same time, spiritual life is just like your spiritual emotional life. This is not an overnight process. And so when I talk about physical life, how you lose weight, how do you gain more stamina, this is not something that happens overnight. And so I would suggest just taking small steps. And honestly, what I love about the Compass Church is we have 4 priorities. And in these priorities, if you focus just on one for now, just focus on one. Take small steps. For example, our 4 priorities are 1, pursue Him daily. In pursuing God daily, we are reading His Word, we are praying. I would also like to take time and say, hey, when you're pursuing Him daily, you're kind of sitting and being with our God and King in an undistracted manner where you're not thinking about what you're going to do next. You're kind of sitting in God's presence. Number 2, connect in groups. Are you connected with other believers who are just as imperfect and dealing with the same spiritual unhealth as you are? Are you connected with these people? Because iron sharpens iron. God uses other Christians to help shape you. That's how I grew in my faith. That's how I grew in my physical life. That's how I grew in my emotional life. Other people surrounded me and helped me become the man who I am today. Number 3, are you serving in a team? When you're thinking about other people and you are starting to serve and use your God-given gifts to help others, that takes the attention away from your flaws into what you should be doing as a Christian. Have you thought about serving on a team, whether it's community impact, guest services, students, children's Compass Kids? And lastly, reaching your neighbor. Are you having spiritual conversations? Because if you do, just like Jake and I had earlier, if you do, you begin to realize, oh, there are people out there who think differently than I do, and I need to take my faith seriously if I'm to show God's light in a dark and hopeless world. So don't feel overwhelmed. We're not superhuman. Take one of the priorities and work a little at a time. And connect in a group. If you feel like you have other Christians you could talk to, or you want to talk to Jake about taking small steps, please contact us. You're not alone.
Not alone. And to quote one of my favorite underappreciated Bill Murray movies, What About Bob? It's all about taking baby steps, right? God will come alongside you. He's already with you. He's for you. He's good. He's going to see what's happening. He knows what's happening. But quite frankly, he blesses steps of faith. Not always in the way we want, but always in a way that's going to bring him honor and glory. Take a step. Take a step, a baby step even, to grow your faith. What's that going to look like this week? Want to just take a moment just to say thank you for joining us here midweek at the Compass. We'll look forward to being here again with you really soon. Have a good one. We'll see you later.